Silver Creek was the kind of frontier town where people talked louder than they listened and judged faster than they understood. Wagons rolled in at dawn, kicking dust over the wooden storefronts, while ranchers argued about cattle prices and soldiers swaggered through like they owned the ground under their boots. Yet for all the noise the town made, there was one thing that quieted every voice whenever she appeared: Alina Reed, the girl they called Untamable. No one remembered the first time she earned that title. It seemed as though she had been born with it stitched into her shadow. She could outrun any boy in town, leap fences like she had wings, and scale canyon walls barefoot, just to watch the sunrise from a place no one else dared climb. When she rode her Mustang Sparrow, she became a streak of motion, wind, hair, and laughter. Her presence felt like a dare whispered to the world, "Try and stop me." The adults of Silver Creek shook their heads often when they spoke about her. They said she needed discipline, said her mother had spoiled her, said a girl who refused to behave would never be fit for a husband. But those words never settled on her shoulders. Elena had learned early that the world made rules for girls that had nothing to do with fairness and everything to do with control, and she had no intention of letting anyone shape her into something smaller than she was. Still, her wildness was not rebellion for the sake of trouble. It was survival. After her father died in a mining collapse, her mother worked long hours cleaning the homes of people who barely looked at her. Elena grew up with responsibility, not privilege. She hauled water, chopped wood, and mended fences before most girls her age even knew how to thread a needle. Strength became her language, independence her shield, and courage her constant companion. But strength also made her a target. People misunderstood what they could not bend. Town gossips claimed she frightened suitors. Soldiers snickered that she needed a firm hand. Ranch wives warned their daughters not to follow her example, that freedom was too dangerous for a young woman. Elena never argued back. It wasn't worth the breath. Instead, she disappeared into the hills where no one could name her or judge her, where she could run and climb and breathe without feeling someone's eyes waiting for her to fail. The wild open country became her refuge, canyons red as embers whispering with the wind, tall pines swaying like guardians over her secret hideouts, smooth boulders warmed by sunlight. Where she lay with her head over her eyes, dreaming of something more than fences and expectations up there, she wasn't the untamable girl. She was simply Elena, a heartbeat in the vast, untouched world. Yet even with all her independence, there were moments when loneliness brushed against her edges. She longed for someone who understood that her strength did not make her unworthy of gentleness, someone who saw past her defiance to the softness she kept hidden. Like a wild horse, she did not need to be broken, she needed to be met. But Silver Creek had no one like that, and Elena had stopped hoping. Everything began to shift the day she stood between her mother and a group of soldiers trying to seize their small patch of land. The commander claimed the family's home was on territory needed for military expansion. Elena knew it was a lie. Soldiers wanted the creek that ran behind the house because good water was scarce, and the army always took what it wanted. She refused to step aside. Even when the commander threatened her, even when men twice her size took hold of her arms, even when her mother cried out begging her to let it go, Elena could not. The land was all they had, and surrendering it would mean losing the last piece of her father's legacy. Her resistance stunned the soldiers. No one expected a girl barely 20 to fight so fiercely. She kicked dust in their faces, twisted against their grip, and hurled words sharper than knives. But numbers won over courage. Soldiers bound her wrists and forced her into a wagon headed toward the fort, where punishment awaited. Where they intended to prove no one defied the army, not even a fearless young woman. As the wagon rattled away, the town watched silently. Some with pity, some with fear, none daring to intervene. Her hair whipped in the wind, her jaw stiff, her eyes blazing even through the ropes. That was the moment Silver Creek understood untamable did not mean wild. It meant unbroken and unseen in the shadows. Someone else noticed too. A pair of dark eyes watched the soldiers haul her away, eyes belonging to a young Apache warrior whose fate was about to collide with hers in ways neither could yet imagine. Sun was still climbing when the wagon jolted out of Silver Creek, carrying Elena away from the only home she had ever known. Dust billowed behind the wheels like a fading echo of her struggle. Her wrists were tied in front of her, the coarse rope biting into her skin with every bump. She sat rigid, refusing to let the soldiers see the sting in her eyes or the fear tightening her breath. Elena had faced danger before: rattlesnakes on canyon trails, sudden river floods, storms that split the sky open. But this was different. Nature never meant to harm her. People did. And people did not forgive a woman who stood her ground. Soldiers riding on either side of the wagon spoke in low voices as if she could not hear them. "Should have known she'd fight like a wildcat," one muttered. The other snorted, saying she was lucky they were only bringing her in for punishment and not something worse. Their words were meant to frighten her, but she lifted her chin in silent defiance. If they wanted fear, they would not find it here. Behind her, Silver Creek shrank into a scattering of shapes and shadows. The saloon with its swinging doors. The church steeple stark against the sky. The row of small cabins where families like hers struggled to hold on to their little squares of earth. Elena's heart ached for her mother, standing helpless near the well as the soldiers dragged her daughter away. But Elena knew she had no choice. If she hadn't fought back, the army would take their home without protest. At least now the town had witnessed the truth. The wagon turned toward the military road leading to Fort Braxton, a harsh outpost carved into the desert rock. Everyone in the region knew what happened to those who were taken there. The army didn't chain people for correction. They broke them for obedience. Some returned quiet and hollow. Others didn't return at all. Elena's thoughts churned like storm clouds, but she anchored herself by repeating one steady truth. She had done what was right. If it cost her her freedom, she would endure it. Her father had always said courage wasn't about the battles you won, but the ones you refused to back down from. Hours passed as the wagon rattled deeper into Apache territory. The land grew rougher, more beautiful, more alive. Red cliffs towered like ancient guardians. Sagebrush whispered in the wind. Far in the distance, a hawk circled high above, free and effortless. Elena envied its wings more than ever. The two soldiers escorting her grew restless as the sun dipped lower. "We should have brought more men," one grumbled. "These parts aren't safe." Elena knew what he meant. Stories drifted through town about Apache scouts moving like shadows across the land scene only when they wanted to be. But unlike the soldiers, she felt no fear. The Apache lived here long before the fort was built. They weren't the threat the army was, yet something tugged at her senses, a quiet prickle along her spine. She wasn't alone. The soldiers didn't notice anything unusual until the horses began to twitch and snort, ears flicking toward the rocks above the trail. Elena kept her expression still, but her heartbeat thrummed faster. She didn't know who watched from the cliffs, only that someone did. The desert never felt this alert without reason. A sudden gust of wind swept sand across the road, making the horses shy. One soldier cursed, struggling with the reins. The other glared toward the canyon walls. "Feels like eyes on us," he muttered. Elena didn't speak, but she felt it too. A presence sharp and silent like a drawn bowstring. The sun was bleeding into the horizon when Fort Braxton finally appeared, a block of stone and iron standing harshly against the desert. Seeing it sent a chill through Elena that even she could not hide. The gates loomed ahead, ready to swallow her whole. The soldiers prepared to pull her down from the wagon when the horses suddenly reared, screaming. The men shouted in confusion. A shadow streaked across the last light of day, swift and sure. And in that split second Elena saw him, a figure on the ridge, dark hair whipping in the wind, bow raised with unshakable calm. She met his eyes from across the distance. They were fierce, clear, and focused only on her. Then everything exploded into motion. The world erupted before Elena could even draw breath. One moment the soldiers were reaching to haul her down from the wagon. The next a sharp whistle cut through the air. An arrow buried itself in the wagon's wooden frame so close to the commander's hand that the man jerked back in shock. The horses thrashed, hooves churning the dirt as panic rippled through them. The soldiers shouted, scrambling for their rifles, eyes darting toward the cliffs. The fading light of dusk painted the ridgeline in gold and shadow. But Elena saw him clearly, the lone figure who had fired the warning shot. He stood balanced on a narrow ledge high above the trail, his stance strong and steady. His long hair blew across his shoulders, dark against the burning sky. He held no gun, only a bow carved from desert wood, but he carried himself with a calmness that frightened even armed men. His presence alone changed the air silent yet commanding, like the mountains themselves rose to defend him. Elena did not know him, yet she felt she had seen those eyes before. Maybe in town, passing like a ghost along the edges, or perhaps in rumors whispered around campfires. Either way, he was watching her, not the soldiers. Watching with purpose. The commander cursed, shouting orders. Find him! He can't have gotten far. But he was wrong. The warrior wasn't trying to flee, he was waiting. Another arrow flew, this time snapping the rifle from the soldier nearest Elena. The man yelped, clutching his hand as the weapon clattered to the ground. Before the other soldier could aim, the horses bucked violently, spurred on by fear and instinct. The wagon lurched, forcing Elena to brace herself with bound hands as the world tilted. The Apache warrior moved from the ridge with startling speed. One heartbeat he stood above them, the next he was gone, swallowed by the canyon shadows. The soldiers spun in circles, unable to track him. The desert had a way of hiding those who understood it. Elena felt her pulse hammering. She knew she should be afraid. Armed men, wild horses, a stranger attacking from unseen places. Any normal person would tremble. But she didn't. Something about the warrior's precision, his silent confidence, made fear loosen its grip on her chest. She sensed he wasn't here to harm her. Rustle behind the wagon made the commander whirl. He lifted his rifle just as the warrior emerged from the dusk, bow discarded now, moving with a speed that blurred his form. In one sweep he struck the rifle aside, the blow so swift the metal sparkled in the fading light. The soldier staggered back. The other soldier tried to shout a warning, but the warrior knocked him flat with a force that left dust spiraling around them. Every movement was controlled, deliberate, not the rage of a desperado, but the precision of someone who fought only when he must. Elena had seen skilled ranch hands lasso cattle and break stallions. She had seen miners use pickaxes with perfect timing. But she had never seen a human being move like this, like a river carving through stone, unstoppable yet smooth. The commander scrambled to his feet, face pale. He reached for Elena as if to use her as a shield, but her knee shot forward before he could touch her. She struck him hard, knocking him back against the wagon wheel. The warrior paused, eyes flicking to her in surprise but also something like approval. He stepped to her quickly but not harshly. His hands went to the rope binding her wrists. Up close she saw the scars along his arms, the steady strength in his features, the way he checked her face before touching her, as if asking permission with his eyes. "You are hurt?" he asked softly, voice deep and accented. She shook her head. "Not yet." A faint smile touched his lips, not amusement but recognition of her resilience. He cut the rope with a swift movement, and the moment her hands were free, blood rushed painfully back into her fingers. She winced. He noticed immediately and touched her wrists gently. "Checking for damage. You fought," he said. Not as a question but a truth. "I wasn't going to let them take everything," she answered. Breathless, his gaze softened, just for a moment. Then he turned sharply as the commander scrambled upright again. "We must go," the warrior said. "More soldiers will come." He reached out his hand to her, not dragging, not demanding, but offering. Elena hesitated only long enough to look around at the dust, the panic, the broken ropes. She could stay and face the fort, or take the hand of the stranger who had risked everything for her. And something deep inside her knew this was no accident. He hadn't been wandering by chance. He had been watching since Silver Creek, watching her. She placed her hand in his. The warrior's grip closed around hers, with firm reassurance, for the first time all day. She felt safe. The canyon stretched into shadows under the silver glow of the moon, the jagged cliffs looming like silent sentinels. Elena ran beside the Apache warrior, her bare feet skimming over warm rocks and soft sand, her lungs burning with effort, yet her mind sharp, focused. Every rustle in the brush, every whisper of wind carried the weight of danger. Soldiers could still be behind them, hunting for their quarry, but the warrior's presence made her feel less like prey and more like a participant in a carefully choreographed escape. He moved beside her with impossible grace, as if the desert itself bent to his will. Every step he took was certain, controlled, guided by instincts honed through years of living in a land where mistakes could be fatal. He did not speak, yet she felt his awareness brushing against her like an invisible shield. His dark eyes scanned the terrain constantly, noting every shadow, every slope, every possible threat. Elena realized that for him, the land was not merely a backdrop, it was a living, breathing ally. And she had been pulled into his world without even knowing it. Finally, they reached a narrow ledge overlooking a hidden creek, water sparkling like shards of moonlight among the rocks. The warrior crouched beside her, his fingers finding the rope knots around her wrists and cutting them with surprising swiftness. The coarse fibers fell away, and her hands tingled painfully with freedom. She flexed her fingers, feeling sensation return, and allowed herself a shaky breath. "You are unharmed," he said quietly, his voice steady low, carrying an accent she did not recognize but somehow felt familiar. It was not a question, but a statement made with certainty, a fact she could neither deny nor contest. I am," she replied, though her chest heaved and sweat clung to her hair and neck. "But you risked yourself to save me. Why?" He studied her for a moment, the fire of the moonlight dancing in his eyes, reflecting shadows of courage and quiet strength. "No spirit like yours should be caged," he said simply. His words were measured, deliberate, but in them lay something unexpected, a recognition of who she was. Not just what the soldiers had tried to make her into. Elena blinked, trying to comprehend. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Townsfolk mocked her, teachers scolded her, soldiers dismissed her, even strangers offered only pity. But this man, who had appeared from nowhere and swept into her life like a force of nature, had not judged her or tried to bend her. He had simply understood her worth. She wanted to speak, to ask his name, to ask how he knew where she would be, but the wind carried the scent of danger. They had no time for introductions. Behind them, the night was alive with the possibility of pursuit. The whisper of soldiers' footsteps faint but real. The threat of discovery persistent. The warrior gestured toward a narrow crevice in the rock, barely wide enough for one person at a time. "We will hide there until it is safe. Then we move again," he instructed, voice calm but firm. Elena nodded, trusting his judgment, though a part of her mind screamed to ask how he could be so confident, so certain that the soldiers would not find them. They slipped into the shadowed crevice, crouching close together, bodies brushing. Elena noticed the heat of him, the strength in his frame, the sense of awareness that seemed to emanate from every fiber of him. She wanted to speak, to break the silence, but she could not. Words felt fragile here, too small for the intensity of the moment. He was not merely rescuing her, he was meeting her on her terms, allowing her to remain untamed even as he guided her to safety. For hours they waited in the darkness. The canyon whispered around them, wind weaving through the rocks, carrying scents of pine, sage, and distant rain. She listened to him breathing, steady, controlled, a rhythm that contrasted with her own racing pulse. Slowly, she began to feel something she had never allowed herself to feel before, a fragile, flickering trust. "I am Elena," she finally said, breaking the silence. He looked at her, and for the first time in the night, his eyes softened. "Kaya," he said. The single name carried weight and calm and a promise she could not yet define. The moon cast their shadows long across the canyon walls, two figures drawn together by chance and courage. Neither spoke again for a while. Neither needed to. The silence was not emptiness. It was connection, fragile and powerful. Like the first spark of a fire waiting to ignite. In the shadow of the cliffs, Elena realized she had not only been rescued, she had been seen. For the first time in her life, someone had recognized her strength, her fire, her wildness, and had not tried to extinguish it. And in that recognition, something in her heart shifted. The night passed slowly in the canyon shadows. Elena and Kaya huddled in the narrow crevice, neither speaking more than necessary. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was charged, alive with the unspoken understanding that they had both survived something extraordinary. For Elena, it was the first time in her life that someone had risked everything for her, not out of duty, fear, or obligation, but because they had chosen to. She studied him quietly, taking in the sharp lines of his face, the calm intensity in his eyes, and the strength that seemed to radiate from his very being. Kaya, for his part, had watched Elena long before he had intervened. He had known of her seeing the girl townsfolk called Untamable racing across the hills, climbing the cliffs, defying every expectation placed upon her. He had seen courage in her movements, in the fire of her gaze, in the way she refused to be subdued. To him, she was not reckless. She was free, untethered by the rules of a world that demanded submission. And he had known from the first moment he glimpsed her spirit that she could not be caged. That recognition had driven him to act, to risk himself in a world that did not forgive intrusion. As dawn approached, the canyon slowly shifted from silver to gold. Elena watched Kaya move with the precision of someone at home in the wilderness. He gathered water from the hidden creek, set up a small fire, and prepared a simple meal of roasted roots and dried meat. He worked quietly, deliberately, his movements efficient yet unhurried. She marveled at the ease with which he seemed to belong in this wild landscape, a stark contrast to the soldiers and townsfolk who had tried to control her. "I've never seen anyone move like that," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as though speaking aloud might shatter the fragile bond that had formed between them. Kaya glanced at her, his dark eyes thoughtful. "The land teaches those who listen," he replied. "It rewards patience, punishes rashness. You move differently because you listen too, even if you do not know it." Elena blinked, surprised by the insight. No one in Silver Creek had ever said anything like that to her. They saw her strength and feared it. They saw her independence and called it defiance. Kaya, however, seemed to see not just her actions but the spirit behind them, and in that moment she felt both seen and understood. For hours, they shared stories of their lives. Elena spoke of her father, of the mining collapse that had left her family vulnerable, of the small home they had fought to keep. She spoke of her mother's sacrifices, the endless days and nights of work, the unspoken love that had carried them both through hardship. Kaya spoke more cautiously at first, sharing little of his own past, hinting at the dangers and responsibilities he carried as a member of his people. but never revealing more than he felt necessary. Despite the differences in their worlds, hers shaped by a town that tried to contain her, his shaped by the vastness of the wilderness and the traditions of his people, they found common ground in courage, resilience, and the refusal to be broken. They laughed quietly at small moments, shared glances that carried meaning deeper than words, and discovered a rhythm in each other's presence. By mid-morning, Elena realized that fear had begun to ebb. The adrenaline that had driven her escape was fading, replaced by a warmth she could not name. Kaya had not only saved her life, but he had acknowledged her spirit, her independence, and her worth. He had not attempted to tame her. He had walked beside her as an equal, a partner in survival. In turn, Kaya found himself captivated not just by her defiance or her courage, but by the depth of her heart. He had seen many faces, many people, but Elena's fire was unique. It was not mere stubbornness or rebellion. It was a refusal to be diminished, a refusal to be silenced, a refusal to give up on what mattered most. In protecting her, he had discovered that she had already protected herself in ways no one else had ever recognized. As the sun climbed higher and the canyon revealed its hidden beauty, Elena and Kaya moved cautiously toward safer ground. Their conversation became lighter, teasing, familiar. Yet beneath every word, a deeper connection pulsed, a silent acknowledgement that something had begun between them that neither could ignore. By the time they paused at a shaded grove to rest, Elena realized that for the first time the world had shifted. She was still untamable, still wild, still fiercely independent. Yet she felt a spark she had never known: trust, respect, and perhaps the beginnings of something stronger, something that might endure even in a world that had tried to break her. Kaya looked at her across the firelight, his expression calm yet intense. In that moment, it was clear to both of them that their paths had converged not by chance, but by design. Two worlds, so different, had met and ignited a fire neither had expected, a fire that would burn long after the soldiers of Silver Creek had faded into memory. The days that followed were tense and quiet. But Elena and Kaya knew the world beyond the canyon had not forgotten her. Even as she reveled in the freedom of open skies, the rustle of the wind through the trees, and the warmth of Kaya's steady presence, there was no illusion of safety. Soldiers from Fort Braxton had lost track of them for now, but their pursuit was relentless, driven by anger and a desire to reclaim what they thought they had taken. Elena had spent her whole life learning to survive on her own. Yet the thought of being hunted ignited a fire within her unlike anything she had felt before. Fear had never been her companion. Determination had. And now, armed with Kaya's guidance and her own instincts, she was ready to face whatever came for them, not as a victim, but as a fighter. The warning came in the early morning. Kaya had climbed a ridge before dawn to scout the surrounding land. When he returned, his expression was sharp, eyes narrowed in calculation. "Soldiers are moving through the canyon below," he said, voice steady, but his grip on his bow was tense. "They will be here by nightfall. We must prepare." Elena's heart did not falter. She felt no hesitation, only resolve. "Then we fight," she said firmly. "I will not hide. I will not be taken again. Not from you, not from this land, not from myself." Kaya studied her, surprise flashing briefly across his features. Most women would have followed him into hiding without question, trembling in fear. But Elena had never been most women. She had faced impossible odds her entire life and had never backed down. Now, facing the soldiers, she was not simply brave. She was fierce, alive with purpose. They spent the day preparing. Kaya taught her how to move silently through brush and rock, how to use shadows to their advantage, how to strike quickly if necessary and retreat before the enemy could respond. Elena absorbed every lesson with astonishing focus, her sharp mind matching Kaya's experience. She practiced with a slingshot and learned to set small traps along the canyon paths, laughing quietly when she realized how effective even a simple snare could be as dusk fell. The first sounds of pursuit reached them. The clatter of hooves, the harsh commands of men who believed they could reclaim what had slipped through their fingers. Elena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, but this time it was tempered with control. She moved with Kaya as one, their steps synchronized, their awareness shared. Every glance, every gesture, every subtle signal spoke volumes, forming a silent language that bound them together. When the soldiers finally emerged into the canyon, they were met with the unexpected. Rocks dislodged by hidden levers tumbled to block narrow paths, small fires blazed briefly to confuse them, and the sounds of movement in the shadows kept them uncertain, cautious. Elena ducked behind a boulder, eyes scanning, bow ready, heart steady. Kaya crouched beside her, watching, calculating. Trusting her instincts as much as she trusted his dot at the first chance, Elena sprang into action. She shot a flaming arrow over the canyon edge, drawing attention away from Kaya as he guided the soldiers' movements toward a trap they could not see. The soldiers cursed and shouted, stumbling over rough terrain, exhausted by the constant vigilance required to navigate the unfamiliar canyon. Elena's presence was more than a distraction. It was a declaration. She refused to be subdued, refused to be hidden away, refused to surrender the life she had fought so hard to claim. By nightfall, the soldiers were forced to retreat, their numbers diminished and morale broken. Elena and Kaya watched them disappear into the distance, chest heaving, faces flushed, but eyes bright with triumph. For the first time, Elena allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. She had not been saved alone. She had participated fully in her own liberation. Kaya's gaze found hers, dark and steady in the firelight, and for a moment the canyon fell away. There was no pursuit, no danger, only recognition. "You are fierce," he said, voice low, a note of respect threading through the calm. Elena smiled, a quiet, triumphant smile. "I've always been," she replied. But even as she said it, she realized something deeper. It was not just about defiance or strength. It was about choice. She had chosen to stand, to fight, to claim her freedom. And in that choice, she had discovered not only courage, but a bond with Kaya stronger than fear, stronger than the army, stronger than anything she had ever known. The canyon night settled around them, stars blinking down as witnesses. And for the first time, Elena understood that freedom was not simply the absence of chains, it was the courage to stand in the face of them. The morning sun barely crested the canyon walls, casting long shadows over rocks and scrub as Elena and Kaya prepared for the day ahead. They had survived the army's first pursuit, but both knew it would not end here. Fort Braxton's men were stubborn, and their commander would not tolerate defeat. Today, Elena understood they would return stronger, smarter, determined to claim what they believed was theirs. Kaya surveyed the terrain with practiced eyes, mapping out every ridge, every crevice, every place the soldiers could be, funneled or ambushed. He had trusted Elena's instincts before, but now he watched her as she moved through the canyon, bow in hand, eyes sharp, senses alert. Her courage had grown into something fierce and precise. She was no longer simply reacting to danger, she was commanding it, anticipating it, shaping it with the knowledge she had gained in the mountains and the lessons he had shared. Elena's heart throbbed with anticipation, yet it was steadier than ever. She had learned to embrace fear, to let it sharpen her focus rather than paralyze her. Standing on a rocky outcrop, she surveyed the canyon below and saw the dust of soldiers approaching. Their ranks were smaller, cautious, aware that they were entering unfamiliar territory. Yet even as she watched them, she felt a spark of sympathy. These men were only following orders, bound by rules and fear, unaware that they were about to face someone who could not be intimidated, and a warrior who had never been defeated on his own land. Kaya crouched beside her, whispering instructions with calm authority. We must be patient. Let them come where we want them. Do not strike too early. Wait for the moment when we control the flow. Elena nodded, trusting his judgment, but she also knew she had learned enough to act on her own. She had trained, observed, survived, and now she understood the rhythm of the canyon, the hidden paths, the ways the shadows could be allies. The soldiers entered the narrow passage first, confident, armored, expecting obedience. They did not anticipate the traps, the fallen boulders, the hidden channels that funneled them into predictable positions. Elena moved silently along the cliffs above, releasing rocks and arrows at precise moments, forcing their attention upward, fragmenting their ranks, creating hesitation where once there had been arrogance. The commander, flustered and enraged, shouted orders, but his voice carried no real authority here. The canyon was no longer the soldiers' domain. It was Elena's and Kaya's. Each movement they made was deliberate, synchronized, a deadly dance of strategy and instinct. Elena found herself exhilarated, the thrill of freedom and defiance coursing through her veins. She was not a girl to be caged or broken. She was a force of her own making, and she would be counted, feared, and remembered. When the soldiers realized they were trapped, the commander attempted a final charge, trying to intimidate Elena and Kaya with sheer force. Elena stepped forward, not to flee, not to hide, but to stand her ground. Kaya stayed close, ready to protect, but she felt no need. This was her fight as much as his, and she would not surrender it. "Leave," she called, voice ringing through the canyon, steady, strong. "I choose my path. You cannot take me. You cannot control me. Go back or face the consequences." The soldiers faltered, unsure how to respond to a woman who met them not with fear, but with command. The commander, momentarily stunned by her defiance, hesitated, and that was all Kaya needed. He moved swiftly, positioning them strategically, ready to strike only if necessary. But the soldiers, recognizing the futility, slowly withdrew, beaten by terrain, traps, and the indomitable courage of a girl they had never truly understood. When the dust settled, Elena and Kaya stood together on the ridge, surveying the retreating army. She felt the cool wind on her face, the warmth of triumph in her chest, and the quiet satisfaction of a battle fought with mind, skill, and unshakable spirit. Kaya's gaze found hers, admiration and something deeper reflected in his eyes. "You were remarkable," he said, voice soft but resonant. "You did not wait to be saved. You chose to stand." Elena smiled, the first real, unguarded smile since her capture. "I've always known how to fight," she admitted, "but I've never had someone who understood what that meant." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, not in possession but in partnership. In that moment, she realized that her freedom was not just from soldiers or chains, but from the world's expectations. And with Kaya beside her, she could finally embrace the wildness of her spirit without fear or compromise. The canyon was quiet now, the threat gone, and in the golden light of dawn, Elena understood something profound. True courage was not merely surviving, it was choosing to stand, to be seen, and to love without surrendering who she was. And at that moment, she knew her heart had found its equal in Kaya, a bond forged not in chains or captivity, but in fire, trust, and mutual respect. The canyon had quieted. The last echoes of soldiers' boots faded into memory, leaving only the whisper of wind through the cliffs, the rustle of leaves in hidden groves, and the distant ripple of Silver Creek itself. For Elena, it was a moment unlike any she had ever known. She stood beside Kaya, feeling the pulse of the land beneath her feet, the warmth of his presence beside her, and the steady rhythm of her own heart free, unbroken, and alive. For years she had been called Untamable. Townsfolk had whispered it with a mixture of awe and fear. Husbands had tried to bend her, teachers had scolded her, and soldiers had sought to cage her spirit. But now she understood that untamable did not mean wild in the sense of disorder or recklessness. It meant freedom of choice. It meant courage and defiance when the world demanded submission. It meant standing fully in oneself, even when everything and everyone tried to make you smaller. Kaya watched her, dark eyes reflecting the canyon light. He had risked everything to reach her, to pull her from the grasp of soldiers who sought to claim her as if her life were theirs to command. Yet he had done more than rescue her. He had recognized her strength, honored her spirit, and never once attempted to change the woman she was. In him, Elena found a rare truth, someone who could love her without asking her to surrender who she had always been. "Why did you come for me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling not with fear, but with emotion. He smiled, a quiet, steady expression that carried the weight of mountains and the calm of rivers. "Because no one like you belongs in chains," he said. "And because I could not let a fire like yours be extinguished." The words wrapped around her, settling in the deepest corners of her heart. She realized that freedom was not just the absence of physical restraint. It was being seen. It was being understood. It was standing beside someone who honored your spirit while offering protection, partnership, and trust. They walked through the canyon together, step by step, moving toward the world outside the cliffs, toward Silver Creek and the life she had left behind. But Elena no longer feared the judgment of townsfolk or the weight of expectation. She had fought for herself, proven her strength, and found someone who met her on equal ground. Every step was a declaration. She would live as she chose, and she would love as she chose. By the time they reached the outskirts of Silver Creek, the sun was climbing high, washing the town in warm light. People emerged cautiously, staring at Elena with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. They had expected a broken girl, frightened and obedient, yet here she stood unbowed, radiant with confidence and vitality. Beside her was Kaya, silent, strong, and unwavering, a living testament to the bond they had forged in the wilderness. Elena's mother ran to her, tears streaming, relief and pride mingling in her gaze. "Elena," she whispered, pressing her hands to her daughter's face. You've survived. You've come back." "I've never left," Elena said softly, her voice steady. "I've only been finding the life I was meant to live." Kaya's hand found hers, fingers entwining with the ease of familiarity. He did not speak over her, did not claim her as a possession. He simply stood beside her, an equal partner in courage and in heart. As the town whispered and gossiped, Elena held her chin high, eyes meeting Kaya's with an unspoken promise. They had faced danger together, defied expectations, and discovered something rare, a love that did not seek to tame, a bond that strengthened rather than confined, even as people tried to label her, judge her, or define her. Elena smiled because she knew the truth. She was untamable, and she would remain so. Yet she had found her home not in chains or conformity, but in Kaya. He had freed her not just from the soldiers or the town's narrow expectations, but from the loneliness that had shadowed her life. In his presence, she discovered that freedom and love were not opposites. They were intertwined, each strengthening the other, each a fire that could never be dimmed. That evening, as the sun set behind the canyon walls, Elena and Kaya stood together on a ridge overlooking Silver Creek. The wind carried their laughter, their quiet conversation. and the steady certainty of a bond forged in courage, trust, and the recognition of true hearts. Elena's wild hair whipped in the breeze, her eyes bright with life. Kaya's hand rested over hers, solid, unwavering, and warm. She had once been untamable in the eyes of the world, but now she was free in the deepest sense, seen, understood, and loved without compromise. And in that freedom, she finally knew the joy of a heart fully alive, fully unbound, and fully home.